What's going on, guys? I'm coming in.
You're listening to
Please, seriously? That's how we're going to start
We invite
this?
people
of all backgrounds
To share their stories.
Through nuanced conversations
and forward thinking.
and not taking ourselves too seriously.
Everyone's story matters.
Every voice is important.
Life is polarizing
But not everything is black and white.
come join us.
as we fade to gray. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fade to Gray. Today we've got, well, he's returning, Brandan Robertson, who is a queer writer,
Heyo.
activist, and speaker, best known for his writing and commentary on millennials, ethics, contemplative spirituality, and his work as an LGBTQ activist to Evangelicals. We spoke with him just a few weeks ago.
All around great dude.
Yeah, he was awesome, and so we thought we'd bring him back to discuss a little bit more about reparative therapy. But before we get into that, you've had kind of a shakeup in your life recently. So the last time we spoke, you said that we might get you into trouble for some of the questions we asked. So
I really hope that's not what
did
happened.
we?
Well, hello everyone. It's so good to be back with you all. No, you all didn't get me fired. It was it's
That's a relief.
thankfully our church is broad enough to handle all the crazy stuff that I might say. But yeah, I've kind of been in the works for a while of planning a transition. When I came to Mission Gathering, my church in San Diego, I'd only honestly committed behind the scenes to being around for about 2 years, and we're coming up on 4. And really, I've been feeling for the past year or so that my calling isn't right now to be in parish or church ministry, but to kind of be on the more activist political side of it, using faith and theology and all of those good things to help make some change in the world. And so I announced a week ago now to my congregation that I'm transitioning in just a few weeks to move back to DC and really engage more fully in the work of kind of faith-rooted organizing and activism from a progressive Christian perspective. So, yeah.
So
I'm
wow,
glad
so,
to hear it wasn't us.
Yeah, that's a relief. It
That
really
is a relief. It really is.
So you're moving to DC to become president. That's awesome.
That's it. You all thought it was Biden, but it was really me the whole time.
Well, apparently Jesus voted, or something like that.
I was going to say,
Something
I might vote for Robertson. I don't know about Biden, but
Yeah. I don't know if I'm ready for that, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm from DC. I've also, like, everyone who knows me knows that DC is my city. It's where I love to be. Even after being in San Diego for 4 years, I still prefer to be in DC. And so it's exciting. Yeah, I'm glad to be going back. And to be, the way I've put it is, like, the West Coast is just a different pace. And I grew up and I'm wired to be an East Coaster, like fast paced. I like to be in the midst of all of what's happening. And DC is going to be that. And thankfully with a new president. So it'll be great.
Well, right on. You're actually be kind of more in my neck of the woods. We're about 5-ish hours from DC. In PA. So,
okay.
Maybe even on your way through, let us know if you're coming through 80. Anyway, let's not talk about geographic locations. Although I don't know how. I mean, you must really be an East Coast boy if you can live in San Diego in the perfect weather and be like, no, and kind of the more maybe liberal like atmosphere and be like, no, I'm gonna pack up and go back to the East Coast. So,
well, they did have a heat wave this summer, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too. San Diego is it's the more conservative part of Southern California, and so going to DC for me is going to be. I mean, I think DC is the gayest city in America, first of all, and I think because of that, it's also one of the most liberal. I was there a couple weeks ago, and you're just walking down the streets all over DC and seeing spray painting that says F Donald Trump, and just, it's an amazing place. Like, yeah. So I'm excited.
Hearing you say something's the gayest thing ever, it has a whole different context than when I hear Chris say it. I don't know.
I don't use gay as a negative. Thank you very much.
But Brandon, I really do appreciate you. You're a great guy. And when you were telling your story last time, it really is what kind of started what we're working on behind the scenes, and really super excited about with reparative therapy series, because between your story and Seth's story and the trauma that he's gone through and still working through, it's just like, man, I don't know if enough people realize the damage this has done in people's lives, and then trying to just make that aware. And we've talked to you a few times. Seth has reached out, and you gave us some names, some pretty excited ones that we have had some really good stories to tell. So just really appreciate that more than anything. So
I appreciate your willingness to have the conversation, because you're right. I mean, either people think that this doesn't happen anymore, and so it's kind of old news, or people are just unaware that it's even a thing. And whether you're a Christian or not, I feel like it's important for people to know this is happening. It's happening a lot still. And the more we can raise awareness, the more I think we can pass laws and also put pressure on churches that are doing this crazy stuff.
Didn't one of these southern states just recently overturn their reparative therapy stuff and are allowing it again in their state? I want to say it's Florida, but I could be wrong. Anybody know?
Sounds right. I've been out of the news for the past month or so, but yeah, I mean, you're right. The fact is that we haven't successfully in majority states been able to pass a ban on this, and I know it's been on the national priority list for like probably 8 to 10 years now. The thing is, it's such a complex issue, right? Because there's a side of it that's about psychology, and we all know that psychologically, conversion therapy, changing someone's sexual orientation, that has been disproven. It's pseudoscience. But on the religious side, it's almost impossible in a country that values religious freedom the way we do to infringe upon a church's right to pray away the gay. And so this is the line that people are really walking as we're trying to have this conversation.
Well, I like that you said that it's pseudoscience, because we actually, believe it or not, we talked about when we were, organizing all the interviews for this series, we actually wanted to hear from someone who actually possibly went through it and says that it worked. We haven't been able to find anyone, and I don't think that you can. I really don't. I don't believe it works.
Oh, there really are people that advocate that it
They'll
does work.
say it, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that it works.
It's actually been hard trying to find somebody who's willing to come on and defend their belief in it working too. So it's been
exactly, and I think that there's a reason for that. If you aren't, if this is something you really believe in, that you really believe people can change their orientation based on some sort of reparative therapy, you should be shouting that from the rooftops then, if that's your religion, right? But you don't really believe it if you're staying silent about it. And I think that that's because people are embarrassed about their own opinions on that, because it is wrong. It's been very deadly. It's been very horrible, right? So we talked to Randy, who was the ex-VP of Exodus International, and it was an incredible interview. He's gone from someone who was behind the curtain, so to say, as someone who was harming people, to now he's doing something that's trying to make amends for what he did, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, thrive. And we talked about cancel culture and how, today he would be canceled, of course, for what he's been a part of, and he wouldn't have been able to make those amends now. He wouldn't be able to make that transition into someone who's actually trying to help and be an ally to the LGBTQ community. And so how that is also a very toxic thing and a very deadly thing, the whole cancel culture thing. So this is such an interesting concept, and people...
I'm curious. So what your thoughts on the cancel culture are coming from the left, because it seems like a lot of the left is heavy on that, and you being in the political realms, I'm wondering, like, what is your
doxing and all that stuff
and all that?
Yeah, cancel culture broadly it terrifies anyone. I think it terrifies everyone who, if you're engaged in any kind of public conversation, you have reason to be afraid, and I don't think it's helpful. I think by and large, the impulse is to be able to hold people accountable. And I think that's right, especially, again, if you're going to be public, you need to be prepared to be held accountable publicly. And I think we're coming towards the end of cancel culture, Lord willing, because it's not sustainable when you judge people for what they did 20 years ago or 5 years ago. Like I say all the time, my beliefs and theology change like weekly. And if you compare what I'm saying today to what I was saying 2 years ago, I'm a different person, and I can't be held accountable to that. And like, just to be very raw and real, like, I've been on Twitter and social media since I was 12 years old.
Right.
I'm really worried, and my generation's going to be worried about, what if somebody digs something up when I was a fundamentalist 12-year-old and said some crazy anti-gay thing, and tries to hold me accountable for that, that's just unreasonable.
Isn't that
It is
interesting
unreasonable.
how that plays, even in kind of, not to divert from the conversation, but even within the political realm, right? With these politicians and things that they may have supported 5 years ago, they don't support now. I find that interesting as well. But I would just note, in talking about reparative therapy, it's not just the laws that are being passed or not being passed, but it's the cultural norms that I think are one of the biggest obstacles that we face. It's not just what's being passed legislatively, but also what is the cultural attitude.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think to that point as well, you all were talking about like the embarrassment around it. The thing is, yes, I agree that people are embarrassed because the broad narrative with movies like Boy Erased and all of that, like publicly, people now think of conversion therapy and think that it's a crazy religious thing.
Chick-fil-A.
But I also, but like it's important also. I have a weird soft spot for Chick-fil-A, but don't know.
Yeah,
can't tell anybody
me
else.
too.
delicious.
They've changed their stance on that. That was
Ever so slightly, but
yeah.
The thing is, conversion therapy has been rebranded, and like this is one thing I do want to say and make a point for people to look up. The guy who founded conversion therapy or reparative therapy, his name was Joseph Nicolosi. I may have said this last time, but his son now runs his organization, and I have it up in front of me. They rebranded it. It's called reintegrative therapy. If you Google that, it sounds much more psychologically verifiable, but it's the same BS pseudoscience condemned. And I think we're seeing this around the world. I've done work in the Republic of Ireland with my friend Senator Fintan Warfield, who's a gay politician over there. And like when you look out over any country or state or whatever, you're not going to find people saying, hey, we do conversion therapy. You're going to find people really trying to be nuanced in their language. But when you dig beneath it, anybody who says that your identity is somehow flawed or a failure of a sinful failure on God's part or your part or whatever, that is always going to point to the same psychological practices and behaviors and harm that is done under the guise of conversion therapy or reparative therapy. And I just think people need to be savvy and not believe the new narrative that conservatives are putting out there about this, because like you said, nobody wants to be known for this, but they're still doing it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they've just rebranded, like of course they're doing that. Why wouldn't they? Of course, I didn't think about that until you said it. What was that called? Reintegrated therapy?
Reintegrative therapy, and it has a trademark logo next to it and a very cool looking icon. Like they're doing a great job. You'd never know what
trying to make it sexy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
All right. So reintegrative therapy. All right. So that's good to know. And let me ask you this, because we're going to get into your experience with it. Yeah. Was this something that you had a decision on? I believe last time we spoke, you said that you put yourself through it.
Yeah. These things are hard to know what influence was happening. I was living in a Bible college with strict rules. And to me, they pulled me into the dean's office my senior year and basically said, in order to prove that you are with us theologically, you need to do this. Of course, college couldn't force me to do it, but it was very heavily suggested that I go through it. So
now, to play a little mind game here, stepping out of evangelical Christianity, is that not brainwashing?
Yeah,
but seriously, the entire messed up nature of it all, because this framework gets instilled within you, and that framework drives you to this point to where there's only one solution, and when you can't meet that solution, it leads you down this path of...
No, I think you're spot on there.
There's no other option. That's what ran through my mind.
Just to add to that real quick, I always said this once I graduated Moody Bible Institute. Moody makes you sign a doctrinal statement when you enter the college in order to be admitted, and you have to sign that same statement when you leave Moody. And I had that realization my senior year that the expectation is over 4 years, you're not supposed to grow. You're not supposed to change your mind. You're supposed to become more deeply entrenched with the same beliefs you came in. And I think that is classic. This is brainwashing. This is indoctrination, plain and simple. And I think that's a lot of evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, and even with the pressure of to belong, it was like, if you're gonna be one of us, you're gonna have to do this. And
Totally.
and I don't, for the people that did not catch your story earlier, I go back and listen to it there, because we got into some details of how you were raised, and one of the things you mentioned that I just so blows my mind was that they believe that, like, dumping the holy water on your private parts was somehow going to make
that was crazy,
your dick non-gay. Like I still to this day, like, that's one of the things that, like,
that sounds like an erotic encounter to me.
It just
a spiritual erotic encounter.
It sounds like there's zero.
It's holy.
Like, who is? I mean, is Jesus, like, what impulse? They think they're being led by the Spirit at that point to do that. Like, it's just that they had this. Like, were you the first time that they were doing reparative therapy, or had they done this with other people in the past? I'm wondering, is it something they continued on after you left? I mean, like,
yeah, if you look it up, I mean, I have the book. I was about to go grab it. It's because I was just rereading it for some ungodly reason. But the woman's name is Leanne Payne, and it's a version of conversion therapy that she started in Wheaton, Illinois. And she was this super charismatic Anglican woman who cured gay people all the time. And people would come from around the country to Wheaton to be cured by her. And you can listen to her tapes online and watch her YouTube videos. She was doing stuff, like there was something going on there. And she integrated all this stuff that would never be accepted by evangelicals, like crucifixes and holy water and holy oil and all this weird kind of sect of
witchcraft
ex-gays
type stuff. Yeah,
they do it, and I bought into it. Like, it's compelling when you're an evangelical and you're told all of that's evil, and now you're trying to get healed of your sexuality, and you get to play with the crucifix and here's some holy water. Like, it's kind of exciting in a weird taboo way. And so it's all just this weird psychological thing that's happening, drawing you in to make you think that this is possible, and that through intense prayer and a little bit of water, God's gonna change your sexuality. It's insane.
All right. So Moody Bible College tells you you're going to have to be in reparative therapy. Is that something that you do concurrently while you're in school, or do you actually have to go to like a rehab center? Tell me, like, did you have to leave? Like, tell me all about that.
So thankfully, I didn't go through what so many people went through. Like Randy Thomas, Exodus International, didn't have to go through those programs. I would have if maybe my experience happened a year earlier, different context. But thankfully for me, we had a professor on campus who was an ex-lesbian who specialized in healing prayer, which was the version of conversion therapy I went through. And she was known for doing this to pretty much every gay student. Like, you went and met with this woman if you were gay. And so I would meet with her once a week, go to her office, and I think I talked about last time, like it's just this, it's so innocuous on the surface. You go in, you talk about your sins, like, what are you struggling with? When did you lust this week? And then she begins, it's this pseudo psychology spirituality. You begin to like use psychological techniques to analyze trauma from your past that's causing you to act in the ways that you're acting today. And you ask God to go back in time. And so we would every week pray about abuse events that happened in my childhood, and we would visualize them. And then we'd visualize Jesus entering into the scene when I was a child being abused. And the thought process was, as Jesus enters that scene, I'm healed from the trauma of that abuse, which then is going to fast forward into my current life and heal me of my sexuality, which is tied to being abused as a kid. And so I always say it, and it's disconcerting to hear, but like after a year of healing prayer, I actually did find psychological healing because I was doing trauma work. But to the end that they wanted it to go, none of that ever came true for me. It didn't help me heal my sexuality. It reaffirmed my personhood as I processed my trauma, and I realized being gay had nothing to do with my abusive father. It was more fundamental part of who I was. And now that I was more of a whole person, I was less afraid to say that. But again, my story is rare. A lot of people, I don't know what it was for me, but a lot of people buy into it more than I did, apparently. And when you get into that shame cycle, I mean, that destroys people's lives. And
since we are on Facebook Live, I do just want to mention this. Someone just commented spiritual warfare and demonic activity. And I just want to note that's often how the church responds. Often. So when we're not holy because we've been broken down by society, and so we attribute it to these other things, which then keeps us in the cycle of shame and guilt when it's our fault, rather than being able to call it what it is.
Everything you're right. And I think that's some of the more abusive stuff too. I mean, my therapist, it was always Satan. It was always the demons are putting a foothold in your life. And it's like, if you tell me enough that my sexual attraction is satanic, like, again, the psychological harm that's doing to somebody, this part of you that you can't change, that you didn't choose, that is intrinsic, is now being labeled as demonic activity in your life. Mm-hmm. That's going to drive you to anxiety. That's going to drive you to suicide because you can't get rid of it. And you're doing all the exorcisms. I mean, the holy water, like, it's the classic image of what an exorcism would look like. And it doesn't work.
And then interestingly, what does that communicate? Right? When you go through all the things, the prayer groups, the church services, the volunteer activities, the worship band, you're saying all the right things. You're doing all the things that you've been told, yet the thing is happening from this. And therefore, the only conclusion you can take is that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. And also invalidate any faith that you had because, like, I'm not a Christian. If obviously I can't overcome this, I must just be so far gone.
Yeah, there's something wrong with me. I'm not.
I don't fault people who want to take a fundamentalist view of Christianity. If they decide that for them it's best to remain celibate, power to you. Okay, like your lesbian, anti-gay, reparative therapy lady, right? Yeah. Apparently that's a decision she made for herself. Great. Why does she feel that she has the power or the, authority to tell you that you can't be who you are? That's where I see it as a huge problem. And I know that Christians who are fundamentalists would say, well, the Bible says, homosexuality is wrong. But I would say you don't even speak Greek or Hebrew. So how do you know that, right? Yeah. It's so interesting to me to see these people be so passionate about something that they're really not that sure about. It's all about faith, right?
Well, Chris, anyway. I mean, we've been there. And that's the thing about listening to this is it makes my stomach hurt. Like, try not to get too emotional, but it really does. I mean, I'm passionately now wanting to, get the word out because I see what it's done to like people like my friend Seth or you with your story, Brandon, and different people in my life now that have gone through this. It's like we need to know that like the actual damage it does to people. But I can't help but wonder, like Chris was saying, like the lady who's gone through this, it worked for her. She's believing in this and she's following her passion with conviction. I want to give some grace. Maybe at first that you don't know what you're doing to people, but over time, now you can see. So like at first the trend, maybe in the 90s or whenever it was when reparative therapy was at its height, like maybe there was some pseudoscience, a little bit of proof. Hey, I'm not gay anymore, for a year or two but then it doesn't work. And then you see more harm than good. I don't know how that same person continues on with the convictions that they have that they're doing the right thing.
And they probably the entire time are struggling themselves with that,
Yeah. And that's the thing I think is important to note, though, is it's often in these situations to get really binary and to say, like, this is true and this is not true. The truth about sexuality is so much more complex than the left or the right wants to acknowledge. And like we know Kinsey is old news now, but sexuality is fluid. And so it is absolutely possible for some people to experience a change in sexual desire over their lifetime. That's true. But that doesn't mean that that is normative. That doesn't mean that that's something you should seek out. And so if you meet an ex-lesbian, maybe that's true for her. Maybe she did have a portion of her life that was primarily focused towards women, and now she's attracted to men or is bisexual or whatever. Great. We can acknowledge that and hold space for that and say, that makes sense even with our psychological knowledge. The question is whether we should be shaming and guilting people and saying that if you are oriented this way and if you are sure that you are gay, which is what happens to most people that enter into reparative therapy, they say that their story is, I was living the lifestyle. Like, they were certain that this is their sexual orientation. They were convinced by a religious community that they were flawed and broken and that somehow they were being motivated by Satan, or their sin was just so deep. And that shame is what's driving them to pursue psychological change, which again, 50 years ago, science would say sexuality is changeable. Homosexuality is a mental disorder. Get a lobotomy, do some shock therapy, and we'll fix you.
God.
So, yeah. But like, it's important to remember, and this is where I have a little bit of grace for the reparative therapy folks, this change has only happened in 100 years from me being lobotomized to me being able to be married. And so they're just slow on the psychological draw, so to speak. But I mean, we know now that stuff has been done. Thousands of people were literally killed because of that and by that. And now it's time to face up to facts. It's time to acknowledge fluidity, acknowledge people's choice, but then condemn any behavior that's rooted in shaming somebody. Because not just in sexuality, I mean, just read any Brene Brown book. Shame drives us to do terrible things, emotionally, physically, all of the above.
So I want to bring up a few points here. One, it's interesting because what I have always been trained to do, right, as growing up in a conservative Christian family that very much believed in Christian morals and Christian values, even though we may legislatively, state to state, rule out reparative therapy practices, what I am finding is that radical Christians, right, people who were what I at once considered myself to be, even though the state is making statements of where it will on this issue, they are still going to drive home that homosexuality is a sin. They're going to still drive home that there needs to be some type of intervention. So it's interesting because the people who are considering themselves to be the most Christ-like and to be the most Christian are even though society is changing, that framework is not changing. And that has me very concerned. And then also, I want to talk a little bit about in making that determination of, hey, I want to be a part of the Christian faith. I want to take these steps. I believe in the Apostles' Creed. I believe in, the communion of saints. I believe in all of that stuff. But if I really want to take this where I would normally, I'm a sin, an abomination, and what the hell am I going to do with that? And then lastly, someone mentioned on Facebook, how do you break through the shame? So in looking at that perpetual cycle, right, of, hey, I'm accepting that I am gay. I want to draw closer to God. I want to take that next step. But in taking that next step, I'm compounding myself with shame and guilt. How does one in this day, I hate to say that in this day and age, but in 2020, how does someone who is gay seek a relationship with Jesus Christ? So believing
there's
what
been
they
like
were
4
raised.
questions. Which one do you want him to answer?
I don't know.
Which one should he answer? He can answer all 4, but let's let him answer one first. Let's go with the listener.
I'm sorry.
Let's go with the listener question
I
first.
got them all compounded, so I apologize.
No, that's
You're
good.
good.
They're all good. They're all great questions. So let's just go one at a time. Let's go with the listener question with the shame. How do you break free or break through the shame?
isn't it ironic that, I mean, all of us who had conservative Christian backgrounds, like half of our worship songs are about how God takes away our shame, how Jesus took away our shame. Like, and I actually think that's pretty damn good theology. Like that, if Christianity is going to be useful in your life, it's going to be useful because of the message that says your flaws and your failures don't define you. Shame should not be the way you function in the world. God's love for you is consistent. And I think the problem when we're talking about LGBT people and Christianity isn't, and I probably said this before, the 6 verses in the Bible, it's the entire paradigm of evangelicalism that has been corrupted by an image of God that looks nothing like the God revealed in Jesus. If our image of God is a divine judge, if our image of God is primarily one who is calling us to a standard of holiness that he knows we can never reach and still holding us accountable for that, that's a terrifying, terrible God. Like, that's not one that I want to believe in, and it's not one that I think Jesus embodied. Instead, we need to take a hard look at who Jesus was and what he taught. If you're trying to relate to God in the way of Jesus, you're going to see the Savior who, yes, was willing to call out sin, but the sins he called out were injustices and systemic sins. Very rarely is Jesus talking about these individual sins, except for how they relate to broader injustices. So rich people can't enter heaven because they're participating in the system that's exploiting other people.
How does that move from your head, though, to your heart? Because what you're saying is all very good, but if you've been programmed, whether it be in your sexuality or whatever it might be, because the church likes to shame down the board. It's all about fear and shame to control people. Yep. And so you're knowing this, and you're listening to people say things like smart people like yourself, Brandon, that are speaking like this truth is empowering word. But then at the end of the day, you're still programmed to look at yourself a certain way. So is there? Maybe it's a baby step sort of a thing, but what would you say to that person that's their struggle, is that they always they want to believe what you're saying. They know it's true.
You have to go through reparative therapy for your reparative therapy.
Seriously, though, right? There is religious trauma is a thing, and it's not been a thing until probably the past 10 years. It's really emerged on the psychological scene as a major thing. But we've all got to go. While I was at Moody going through reparative therapy, halfway through it, something, I don't even know what series of events led me to start going to this liberal Presbyterian church that had a psychologist that was there, and she would meet with me once a week for free. And so while I was in reparative therapy, I also started doing mainstream good therapy, and we started doing stuff to help with my PTSD that I had for all sorts of reasons. And I think that's probably what saved me and helped me not feel so traumatized by what happened to me. And I think we obviously need to destigmatize mental health, but this stuff isn't just stuff you should talk about with your friends or with your new progressive church. If you have the means, get yourself into therapy and talk through this, because unless you can get the fundamental things that religion kept you from forming, because I think a lot of times Christian religion in its conservative forms keeps us in an infantile state for longer than we should be. And what therapy can help us do is build the internal aspects of maturation that we didn't get. And
the whole person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yes, get reparative therapy for your reparative therapy. Heal yourself. Figure out the things and the false beliefs that are functioning beneath the surface that you might not even be able to name, that are both bad theology, but also just fundamentally not true. It's basic, but it's also a hard step for a lot of people to take, to actually admit, I've been traumatized by my religious past, and I actually have real psychological issues rooted in that I need to work through.
So so put in work, kind of. It's like you said, like you just said, you have to work through it. It's not something and everybody heals at different speeds, I guess. And so don't maybe put the pressure on you that you're going to have to be fixed immediately. And I know that there's a lot that Seth can speak on this because he has 2 master's degrees in this area. And
I also think there's probably people who are going, I would love to go get therapy, but I don't have the means or the money. if you work somewhere, you may have an employee assistance program where you can get free therapy. I've taken advantage of that myself, and so I highly recommend it. It's certainly a great program. I didn't mean to take away from what Seth was about to say with all of his master's degree knowledge.
No, but that's really good thing just to know that it's something to look into. It's worth looking into to put the work into yourself. It's that it's not going to happen by itself. But yep, do the work.
I want to plug real quick that, like, I think I was talking about TikTok last time I was on here, and TikTok continues to blow me away. Like, what I'm seeing happening, and this will be like the first time I'm sort of announcing this, but like there has been a real community that has formed on my TikTok channel of hundreds and hundreds of people that are coming from Christianity and trying to find this new way of being Christian and have been deeply hurt by it. And like this past week, one of the folks that is on my TikTok started a Discord channel, and I didn't even know what that was. And so now we have this channel of people that are just supporting each other virtually. And in January, we're going to start launching through my nonprofit Metanoia, a weekly group where for a while we did it, and we had like 60 people from around the world coming together face to face on Zoom and talking and processing and thinking about all this. And so this kind of stuff exists out there. I would love it if anybody who's listening and has some trauma comes and joins and spends some time with us, but also just like there are free, helpful resources out there about processing your trauma from conservative Christianity. And we might not be psychotherapists, but just having a network of support is super helpful in healing.
Definitely appreciate that, man. Yeah, check that out. And I'm sure with the way you communicate and the personality with yours, you may not, like you said, be a psychotherapist, but you have many years of experience in the church and your own story. So appreciate you, man. But there was other questions. You had like 4 of them there before I cut you off earlier, Seth. And do you want to hit any more of those before we move on?
Oh, I probably think I got all of them. The main questions were, looking at your strong faith, your internal faith, and then how that impacts shame and guilt. And actually, I do want to ask that question because that question was brought up actually in the Facebook Live feed, which the question is, let me pull it up here. How do you break through the shame?
Yeah, he just did that one,
Okay.
But what about you had another one that you wanted to ask if not, I'm sure Chris had something.
I think it's okay. I think I got all I needed.
Right on. Cool. So TikTok, huh? That's, good.
If I have to hear that "Oh No" song one more time on TikTok, I'm going to delete it.
Some of that stuff gets a bit repetitive and old, but it's mind blowing. I actually did a TikTok today about this. Like, I don't know if you all remember, you were in the church world back then, but in the early 2000s, late 90s maybe, there was like an internet church movement, like people trying to make church happen online. And like, I feel like 50 people in the world decided to do that and thought that was a good idea. And the rest of us kept going to normal church. But now, through this pandemic, I feel like we have discovered for the first time how to use technology in a way that like actually feels like we're connecting, that's actually meaningful, that's actually nourishing. I'm seeing that through, over the course of this pandemic, I can't tell you how many Zooms like this that I've gotten to be on. And like, this is deep stuff. I feel like I know you guys. I feel like we're sharing deeply in a way that I don't remember doing before the pandemic. And TikTok is me getting on and making these 60-second videos, giving my liberal hot takes on theology. Like, the community I've seen formed on my TikTok is so real and so impactful. And I'm just really, I don't know what to think about it or do with it, but I'm excited that I think in a new way, this interconnectivity of this post-Christian spiritual community is going to have so much power in the days ahead. And it's almost to the point where I don't want to see the pandemic end so that we can keep doing this. But I didn't say that.
Why should you say? Because you might get your wishes.
But No. We got that vaccine coming out in December, y'all. What is your TikTok handle?
It's Rev Brandan Robertson.
Rev Brandan Robertson.
When you talk about TikTok, you make me feel old, Brandon, because I'm like, I had to learn a whole nother social platform now. I went all in with Marco Polo. You know, that we wouldn't be where we're at. A lot of stuff you're saying is kind of like how our Marco Polo community was formed. It was very impactful for a few years in my life, and I kind of like am getting burnt out on Marco Polo now. And it's like by the time I learn how to use TikTok, like there's gonna be some other new platform that that people are gonna come talk to me about. This is the new thing. I'm like, I just can't do it anymore. It's just stop. But no,
I think that's so true. And I feel old on TikTok. I mean, most of the people are high school kids, and I think I might have said this before too. But it's so crazy how many conservative 15-year-olds that are on TikTok that are willing to come for me and call me false teacher. Like, it makes me want to stay on there and help evangelize the next generation. And so I think all of you should help join me to win them for Christ. Come on.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I might, have you give me some tutorials and like walk me through some TikTok, because I know that'd be good for at least the podcast. And with
Seth is also the king of TikTok. He sends me TikToks like every day that are awful.
That's a whole other story. Yeah.
I don't
talking about gay culture.
I don't create TikToks. I just simply watch TikToks.
I've seen some that you created, but
that's true. That's true. You have created some.
I'm very shy, and I'm not attractive on camera, and I don't have anything witty
That's
to
not
say.
true.
I've tried. It doesn't work. If we can pull stuff from interviews, I'm okay with it. But if it's me developing content, no, that's not a good idea.
We should have you do some singing and or maybe a little.
Oh, please no.
Well, anyway,
no way. I find myself on TikTok getting really angry at, for some reason, the TikTok algorithm knows I'm interested in religion, and so it puts this bullshit up from like the Creation Museum all the time, and I just want to go in there and like, troll them so hardcore, and but I just swipe, don't show me again or whatever it is. You like you long press it and it says, I'm not interested or whatever. And so I've just been trying to do that.
Next time that happens, you need to push the button on the corner, the little arrow, click stitch, and then record a response. Because the thing is, this is what's been so refreshing about TikTok is when I was like 18 to 20, I had people come into my life that I didn't ask to come into my life that blew my mind and like said the thing that was like, you're not supposed to say as a Christian, and blew my theological paradigm. And I get to get on TikTok and just say something as simple as Noah's Ark is a myth, and watch thousands of young people's minds blow, and then like witness them begin the journey of deconstruction. And it's so satisfying. And you actually like, I can preach in front of my congregation
you just
for
blew
4 years.
Seth's mind by saying that too, by the way.
Brandon. I don't agree with the statement that I am about to share.
Uh-oh.
But there is scripture that says, in the last days,
oh my gosh,
there will come false prophets proclaiming a gospel that is outside of Christ's message.
Gospel.
And that just sounds a little false prophecy to me. I actually agree with you, but understand from a conservative teenager, right, whose parents are Southern Baptists.
Yeah, but once they realize that
you are the enemy.
Once they realize that the flood of Noah is actually a tale from other myths as well, they can start to go, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something to that.
Well, also, I mean, the very fact that the whole false prophet thing, they thought that was happening in their lifetime. Those false prophets that's come and gone. Jesus was already supposed to come back.
Paul thought Jesus was coming back in his lifetime.
So clearly they were wrong. No false prophets here. We win.
I like what you had to say about Paul in the last talk that we had.
Didn't.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about Paul. He kind of just came in there and hijacked everything, and probably didn't have any idea who Jesus was.
Yeah, but I think last time this is the most compelling. But if I do PhD work, I'm going to study this as part of it. That Paul is the Antichrist. That all the literal Jesus said, soon someone is going to come proclaiming that they're speaking my gospel, and they're going to say, here he is, and there he is. Then Paul comes along, this guy who's never met Jesus, saying Jesus is coming back imminently, and this is the message he showed me in visions that nobody else heard, but I'm a real apostle. Like, there's this whole new theory that's emerging that says Paul is actually the Antichrist that was prophesied by Jesus and Peter and other people. And we all bought into it. Like,
that's 90% of the New Testament, Brandon.
Exactly. There's a reason Jesus is the Word of God. There's a reason there was not much of a New Testament after Jesus was on earth. There wasn't any New Testament after Jesus was on earth because he was the Word of God. He came to set us free from the burden of the law. Come on.
And so you also mentioned that you appreciated Mark more than any of the other Gospels. Why is that?
Mark, because we know Mark is the most historically accurate, just biblical scholarship, Jesus seminar stuff. Like, they spent years looking at the sayings of Jesus, and we all probably know there's this belief among all biblical scholars of all theological stripes that there was a document that people call Q that predated the Gospels that was just
QAnon?
Yes, exactly. It's actually unfortunate that all these things are so similar, but Q was just a document of the sayings of Jesus, the authentic sayings of Jesus. And scholars believe that all 4 writers of the Gospels used this document and then wrote out their narratives and inserted these real sayings of Jesus. Mark, if you look at it, is the shortest gospel. It's not very narrative-like. It's Jesus said this, did this, moved over, said this, did this, moved. Scholars just say that's the most accurate account, and it has the most authentic sayings historically of Christ. Whereas you get to like the Gospel of John, which is 40, 50, 60 years, even 100 years by some scholars after Jesus existed. And it has this very developed Christian theology that isn't there in the Gospel of Mark. I mean, remember, Mark doesn't have a virgin birth. Mark doesn't have a resurrection. Mark is the earliest version of the Jesus story. By the time you get to John, you have Jesus saying, I am God. And that's a big difference from what was happening in the earliest days of the Christian movement.
Makes you think. It makes you think. So I'm glad that we've moved on from our TikTok tutorial earlier. But I will say one thing about that. If you maybe help Fade to Gray get a presence on TikTok, maybe we can help you, get your foot in the door podcasting, because you definitely have a lot to say. And I really love the way that you are able to break down the knowledge that you have, the time you spent like in the Greek and the Hebrew, and able to because that's stuff like I've spent my whole life raised in Christianity, and you're saying some stuff to me that I've never heard anybody else kind of say before. And it's kind of making sense. I'm like, wow, that, the Gospel of Mark is that way. And because I was speaking to some other people, they've kind of hinted to some things, but it kind of connects the dots even more of why maybe the virgin birth sounds a lot like other stories you hear in Greek mythology and stuff like that. So
yeah, I'm excited. I honestly, to be able to step outside of, and to any church people watching this, don't hate me for saying this, but to be able to be outside of the institution of a church allows me to be a little bit more free with the things I'm thinking. I felt as a pastor, I needed to kind of hold it down a little bit, but there's there's so many credible biblical scholars out there, ranging from Bart Ehrman to John Dominic Crossan, that are saying revolutionary things that are not like crazy conspiracy theories. These are things that are backed up by hundreds of years of good scholarship about who Jesus was. And one of the newest things around, since we're at Christmas time, there's credible evidence that Jesus was obviously not born in Bethlehem, that he was born in Nazareth, but also
shut your dirty mouth.
Yeah. And that's
going to break some prophecies in the Old Testament.
Exactly, though, but because why doesn't Mark have a Bethlehem story? Well, because it didn't happen. Mark says, what do they call Jesus? Jesus of Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? They said everyone knew he was born from Joseph and Mary in Nazareth. And by the time you get to Matthew and John, the Jewish writers are trying to make Jesus fit what everyone expected the Messiah to be. Now, I don't think this makes Jesus not the Messiah. And we can talk about that on a whole nother.
Hold up here. He can be born in Bethlehem and still a child of Nazareth because his parents were from Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem.
That's the conservative Christian argument, but everything in the Gospel of Mark suggests Jesus is born in Nazareth, and every piece of archaeological evidence we have There is zero evidence if you go
But
to
the
the
wise
Church of
men
the...
followed the star, and they gave them frankincense and myrrh. Come on.
That's not even in the Bible.
What about the little drummer boy? He was there.
Oh my gosh, I played the little drummer boy in church growing up.
I'm sorry,
All right.
Brandon. You're saying some deep stuff, and it
No.
really is making sense. And I'm over here making jokes, but that's what
I'm just trying to make trouble and get the comments going crazy on here. So
No, I love it. I love it because I think that that's the problem with Christianity is people have taken it so literally and not as prose or not as, an exaggeration or whatever, that they've become passionate about something that's not even real, or that's not necessarily unreal, but it's not accurate, if that makes sense.
yeah,
And passion without knowledge always ends up deadly. We see that with every religious group. You have, the Crusades, right? You have the Christian Crusades. You have, of course, the terrorism currently with radical Islam.
They both still exist.
Of course they do. But I'm just saying, that's what causes that kind of radical idea, is that they look at this text and they're unshakable about what that text says. They cannot look past it and say, well, maybe this was exaggerated to fit a narrative or to fit, some sort of a legend of the day. Like, for example, Jesus was born of a virgin. Well, so was Caesar. Jesus ascended to heaven. So did Caesar. Yeah. Right. So they need to know these things. They need to understand. And if they were to be able to exegete or whatever they call it and know what was happening during the time that these things went on, they would be able to see Jesus was totally not born of a virgin. It's impossible.
Yeah. And
it's impossible.
But the thing is, our modern mind automatically jumps to, well, then the writers of Scripture were sinister. They were trying to lie to us. And it's like, no, actually, the writers of Scripture knew that Jesus wasn't born of a virgin. They knew that all of his life was a parallel. For instance, the Gospel of Mark parallels Homer's Odyssey almost exactly. I talked about that last time. Like, the writers and all the early Christians knew that, and they didn't have a problem with that. Christianity isn't less beautiful because it uses mythology. All good religion in the past, including Judaism, and that's how the rabbis have always talked about the stories of the Exodus and the stories of Adam and Eve and the stories of Noah's Ark. It wasn't about them being factual historical events. These are powerful, symbolic, metaphorical stories that tell deep truth. And the Jesus story, I think a lot of it is historically verifiably true, and a lot of it was embellished and mythologized, not out of sinister motives, but to take the metaphors that Jesus taught and used and help expand them so that they would be more universal, help them endure longer. And I think we can look at Christianity and say the early Christians were brilliant because they created something that's lasted 2,000 years and
tells a good
has
story.
dominated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's, you got to look at, even, let's just be real, and that's what movies do today. There's no original story out there. I think the Bible even says that, everything's a shadow or being redone. And so who's to say?
We're not angry at C.S. Lewis for writing the Chronicles of Narnia because it's not true. No, we love it because it communicates truth.
I actually think they suck.
Okay, well, you also like Harry Potter, so you can go get fucked anyway.
Harry Potter's a much better allegory.
Tolkien and Lord of the Rings defeats both.
No, first of all, Harry Potter is written by that transphobic woman. Terrible. And
she's not transphobic.
I'm not opening that can of worms. That's it.
Yes.
I'm leaving that there.
Oh man, we've gone to some good places. I know that we had you on to talk about reparative therapy, but there's so much going on, and you're a deep well of conversation. And I was kind of joking, kind of not, if as far as getting you out there. I know your platform right now, you're finding a lot of following and a lot of freedom and excitement is on TikTok, but I think that you should have presences in other places as well. So if you ever want to get into podcasting, I know a network that's getting ready to start doing some big things and maybe point you in the right direction. Just let me know if we can help.
Y'all on TikTok, come on.
Yeah, all about it. And so
you've kind of inspired me to want to maybe do what you're saying to be able to, I don't know what you said, something about stitching and reacting.
Yeah, it's like 2 buttons. And all you do, you hit record, you record a
Yeah.
minute, and it's up there. And like, you're going to love it when you start doing it. When you see the crazy people come after you, first of all, and then all of the people be like, tell me more. Where can I learn more? I want to go deeper. It's so satisfying. So good.
I just have a hard time being kind to people that are stupid. And so I don't know if that's the right thing for me to do, to be honest.
Well, the truth is, I mean, if you want noble motives, maybe not, but I mean, you'll get lots of followers by being unkind to the Creation Museum. That'll be fine.
It might feel better at the end of the day, Chris. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. I don't know if you have any more thoughts. I know you've got some big stuff going on as you're moving to DC, and maybe down the road we'll have you back on when you can talk some more about that.
When he's running for president.
2024, baby.
See you in 4 years.
But yeah, any other thoughts? Anything else that you want to plug? Any directions the listeners can maybe other than TikTok? Just TikTok.
What else is there? Why would you want anything else? But yeah, I mean, if you want to follow my website has everything, brandanrobertson.com. But otherwise, for the rest of the year, I'm TikToking, and I'll have a new book coming out and about that. Then it's a secret till then. So
Awesome. Very cool.
Exciting.
Well, thanks, Brandon, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll talk to you soon.
So good to see all you. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks, listeners. Peace.